Emily and Daniel were the couple everyone envied. From glossy magazine covers to celebrity galas, their love story appeared flawless, like something out of a dream. Daniel, a sharp and charismatic tech entrepreneur, had built an empire from scratch and now stood among the country's wealthiest under 40. Emily, once a schoolteacher with a heart for community work, had seamlessly transitioned into her role as the poised wife of a public figure. Together, they were elegance personified, always hand in hand at red carpet events, their photos circulating through tabloids with captions like, "Power Couple Goals." Their sprawling mansion on the cliffs of Malibu was the kind of home people only saw in movies. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered panoramic ocean views, and their garden parties were legendary. A-list celebrities, business moguls, and politicians regularly attended their charity dinners, raising millions for underprivileged children and education programs, causes close to Emily's heart. She never let fame harden her. She remained gentle, thoughtful, and humble, which made the public adore her even more. Emily had just reached the second trimester of her pregnancy, and she glowed with maternal joy. She spent her mornings reading parenting books and decorating the nursery with pastel colors and handmade crafts. She often placed Daniel's hand on her growing belly, smiling as their child kicked. "Our little miracle," she would whisper, her eyes full of love. But beneath the warmth and admiration, a slow shift had begun to form, one that Emily, in her blissful excitement, barely noticed. Daniel had started to grow distant. His kisses became quicker, his excuses more frequent. Meetings ran late. His phone buzzed at odd hours, and he often left the room to answer. When Emily asked about his stress, he would smile tightly and say, "Just work, darling. Nothing you need to worry about." He still accompanied her to public events and held her hand for the cameras, but in private, a silent wall had begun to form. Emily chalked it up to pressure. Maybe he was nervous about becoming a father. Maybe he was overwhelmed. She gave him space, hoping love would steady them again. What she didn't see, what she couldn't imagine, was that someone else had already found their way into that space. Sasha made her entrance with all the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and how to get it. With cascading auburn hair, a figure that turned heads in every room, and a sharp mind for branding, she quickly climbed the ranks at Daniel's firm. Her performance in the marketing department was impressive, but it wasn't just her campaign results that caught Daniel's attention. It was the way she spoke to him, boldly, flirtatiously, as if she didn't see him as her boss, but as a man she could conquer. At first, it started with harmless banter during late meetings, inside jokes during team dinners, and glances that lingered a little too long. Daniel, already emotionally detached from Emily, found Sasha's energy intoxicating. Unlike Emily's calm warmth, Sasha was electric, unpredictable and exciting. She made him feel powerful again, like a man desired not for his last name or bank account, but for his edge. When she laughed at his jokes, touched his arm accidentally, and leaned in just a bit too close, Daniel didn't resist. The affair began in secrecy, sparked by a night of drinks after a company gala. Daniel told himself it was a one-time mistake, but Sasha had no intention of letting it go. She wrapped herself around him with perfect timing, always available when he needed to vent, always validating his frustrations. And slowly, she began feeding his insecurities like poison in a glass of wine. "I've seen the way Emily looks at your money, Daniel," she said one evening, curled up next to him in his penthouse suite. "She doesn't see you anymore, just the lifestyle you give her." Daniel didn't want to believe it, but Sasha kept her grip tight. "You're suffocating in that marriage," she purred. "You need someone who understands you, someone who makes you feel alive." She criticized Emily's modest clothing, her slow speech, her pregnancy weight gain. "She used to be cute," Sasha would say with a cruel smile, "but now, she just looks tired." Under her influence, Daniel began seeing his wife through a distorted lens. Sasha didn't just want to sleep with him, she wanted to replace Emily entirely. And Daniel, clouded by lust and confusion, couldn't see the storm he was inviting into his life. As Emily's belly grew, so did the silence between her and Daniel. The once warm home was now chilled by unspoken tension and fading affection. Daniel stopped kissing her good morning. He came home late from the office, if at all, and when he did, his excuses were rushed, eyes glued to his phone, mind clearly elsewhere. Doctor's appointments, nursery shopping trips, and even their once-weekly dinners became business conflicts. Emily sat alone in the candlelit dining room more than once, staring at cold meals and wondering if she had done something wrong. Still, she made excuses for him. He's stressed. He's overwhelmed, she told herself. Fatherhood is scary. He just needs time. But deep down, a pit had begun forming in her stomach, one that no amount of baby books or cheerful decorating could fill. Daniel rarely touched her anymore. When she reached for his hand in bed, he rolled away, feigning sleep. Her once attentive husband was now a stranger. Meanwhile, Sasha tightened her hold on Daniel like a python. She knew exactly what buttons to push. Every evening became an escape from reality, lavish rooftop parties, exclusive underground clubs where the drinks flowed endlessly and the music drowned out guilt. Sasha introduced him to a life Emily would never approve of: cocaine at high-rise lounges, poker tables with dangerous men, and impulsive shopping sprees that left hundreds of thousands wasted on watches and custom suits. "You deserve this," Sasha would whisper as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "You've built an empire. Why shouldn't you enjoy it?" Daniel didn't notice how quickly the lines between indulgence and destruction blurred. He began missing board meetings. His temper flared at employees. His company's CFO started raising concerns about questionable expenses. But Sasha always had a new thrill to distract him. Another luxury car, another party, another night in a penthouse suite that reeked of champagne and regret. Emily, though still hopeful, couldn't ignore the way Daniel recoiled when she asked to spend time together. Her once gentle husband was now sharp-edged and irritable. And as she looked at their wedding photo one lonely night, hands resting on her belly, she whispered to herself, "Where did you go, Daniel?" She had no idea that he was already in someone else's arms, and in a world she would never recognize. It was supposed to be a sweet surprise. Emily had spent the afternoon baking Daniel's favorite dessert, something she hadn't done in months. With a handwritten note tucked beside the box of warm apple tarts, she drove to his office, hoping a small gesture might remind him of their earlier days, of love that once felt unshakable. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and fear as she stepped into the building, the security guard smiling warmly as she passed, none the wiser to the storm she was walking into. Daniel's office lights were dimmed, but she could hear laughter, low, intimate, unmistakably familiar. As she approached the glass doors, she froze. There, in the warm amber glow of the city lights, was Daniel, standing close to Sasha. Too close. His hands were on her waist, their foreheads touching, lips brushing with the ease of practiced lovers. Time stopped. The dessert slipped from Emily's hands, shattering on the floor with a dull thud that echoed in the silence. Daniel and Sasha snapped around, startled. Sasha smirked. Daniel's face fell, but not with shame, with annoyance. "Emily," he said flatly, like she was an unwelcome interruption. Emily's breath caught. Her chest tightened. "How could you?" she whispered, her eyes glistening with disbelief. She stumbled backward, clutching her belly. Pain, sharp and sudden, gripped her lower abdomen. Within seconds, she collapsed. Hospital lights flickered overhead as doctors rushed around her. Monitors beeped rapidly, and sterile voices barked out terms she barely registered. The baby was okay, for now, but the stress had triggered a dangerous spike in her blood pressure. She was warned, one more shock like that, and her child might not survive. But the deepest pain came when Daniel arrived. Not in panic, but in fury. "What were you even doing there?" he snapped. "You've been acting like a paranoid, controlling housewife for months. Always accusing, always watching. It's exhausting." Emily stared at him in disbelief. No apology. No remorse. Just cold justification. Sasha stood at the door, arms crossed, her presence like a final dagger. Something inside Emily broke. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just turned her face away and whispered, "I'm done." That night, without telling anyone, Emily checked herself out of the hospital. She left behind her mansion, her marriage, and the man she once believed would protect her forever. And just like that, she vanished, leaving Daniel with nothing but echoes of the life he'd thrown away. With Emily gone, Sasha wasted no time claiming her prize. She moved into the mansion within a week, her designer luggage taking up space in closets that once held Emily's neatly arranged maternity clothes. The baby photos Emily had framed and hung with care were taken down. Her gentle scent, the soft lavender that once filled the halls, was replaced with sharp perfume and cigarette smoke. Sasha didn't just fill the space, she overtook it, turning their once loving home into her personal playground of indulgence and control. Daniel, still reeling from Emily's sudden disappearance but too proud to admit he missed her, clung to Sasha like a lifeline. She soothed his ego with words that masked manipulation as affection. "You were never truly free with her," she whispered one night, curled against him in bed. "Now you can finally live." And Daniel, hungry for validation and desperate to drown his guilt, let her in, deeper than he ever realized. Soon, Sasha started making appearances at the office, not as an employee, but as the woman behind the man. She charmed Daniel's inner circle with her beauty and confidence, but slowly, subtly, she began pushing people out. His sister, who once adored Emily, confronted Daniel about the affair. Sasha called her toxic, and Daniel cut her off. His oldest friend and CFO raised concerns about financial decisions Sasha was influencing. Private jets, random business write-offs, reckless ventures. Sasha suggested he was jealous, envious of Daniel's success and relationship. The friend was fired within a week. Sasha began asking questions about company passwords, investor access, board meetings. Daniel, enamored and distracted, handed her everything. She cloaked herself in authority, telling staff to run decisions by her before speaking to Daniel. The employees whispered, morale sank, and longtime partners began distancing themselves from the chaos that followed wherever Sasha went. The mansion reflected the shift. Once a serene haven, it turned into a dark circus of parties, champagne spills on imported rugs, and strangers roaming the halls at all hours. Sasha invited influencers, washed-up celebrities, and questionable businessmen. Laughter echoed in the halls, but it wasn't joyful. It was mocking, empty, and laced with malice. Daniel, though occasionally overwhelmed, dismissed the discomfort as adjustment. "It's just a new chapter," he told himself, sipping whiskey in the same garden where he once rubbed Emily's pregnant belly. He was losing clients, respect, and peace of mind, but he refused to see the cause. Because Sasha had mastered her role. She cried when he doubted her, seduced him when he questioned her, and praised him just enough to keep him tethered. Every time he showed hesitation, she reminded him of Emily, how she abandoned him, how she made him feel small, how Sasha was the one who stayed. Daniel believed her. He believed everything she said. And in doing so, he handed her the keys to not only his home and heart, but the very empire he once vowed to build for the woman he betrayed. The cracks in Daniel's empire started small, barely noticeable at first. A missed deal here, a delayed payment there. But as the months rolled on, the bleeding became impossible to ignore. Sasha's impulsive decisions, masked as bold business moves, began to cost the company millions. She pushed for flashy ad campaigns that failed to connect, sponsored influencers with questionable reputations, and greenlit unnecessary expenses that drained the budget. Daniel's once stable, respected company started to sway under the weight of recklessness. One by one, Daniel's most loyal employees left. Some resigned in quiet disappointment, others walked out after confrontations with Sasha, who had taken to storming into meetings uninvited and treating department heads like her personal assistants. The CFO, who had warned Daniel months earlier, left with a bitter email that ended with, "You chose charm over strategy. Good luck." As the foundation crumbled, so did Daniel's public image. Once praised as a visionary entrepreneur and family man, he now appeared in tabloids for all the wrong reasons. Sasha, always camera-ready, flaunted their relationship on social media with provocative photos, designer shopping hauls, and captions dripping in arrogance, power couple vibes. "I make empires sexier." The press, which once celebrated Daniel and Emily as the gold standard, now tore him apart. Rumors of drug use, financial instability, and boardroom chaos circulated daily. Investors began to panic. Stocks dipped. Meetings turned tense. No one trusted Sasha, and worse, no one believed Daniel was still in control. He tried to reassure everyone, said the numbers would bounce back, that the media was exaggerating, but the desperation in his voice betrayed the truth. Behind his designer suits and tired smiles, he was unraveling. At home, the toxic glamour of life with Sasha had soured. The parties felt hollow. The mansion, once vibrant, now echoed with tension. Daniel began avoiding eye contact with staff who had known Emily, ashamed of how far he had fallen. But pride kept him silent. He couldn't bring himself to admit he'd chosen wrong, that the woman he pushed away had been the very soul of his life. Still, he stayed with Sasha. He clung to the illusion, fearing the collapse of everything he'd sacrificed to keep her. And so, as his world dimmed and the empire he'd built began to crumble brick by brick, Daniel remained trapped in a golden cage of his own making, too blind to escape, too stubborn to confess the truth. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the envelope arrived. No return address, no markings, just his name written in delicate cursive. Daniel was seated at the breakfast table, scrolling through negative headlines about yet another failed business move, when the butler handed it to him. He opened it lazily, expecting another lawsuit or investor warning. But instead, inside was a sleek, embossed card. You are cordially invited to an exclusive evening hosted by the EL Foundation. Private charity gala. By invitation only. Location and details enclosed. Daniel frowned. The name didn't ring any bells, but something about the initials felt familiar. EL. There was no pitch, no sponsor logos, just elegance, mystery, and an RSVP line that hinted at high society and elite guests. Tucked beneath the card was a silver ticket, numbered and signed. A part of him wanted to throw it aside. He wasn't in the mood for charity galas, especially not after weeks of bad press and internal company chaos. But Sasha, ever eager for attention and luxury, snatched the card from his hand. "Oh, this looks exclusive," she purred. "Exactly what we need. A reset. Let them see we're still the couple everyone watches." Daniel hesitated, but the thought of stepping back into a room where people still might respect him, even for one night, stirred something in him. Curiosity prickled. Maybe it was just another elite event. Maybe it was nothing. But the initials wouldn't leave his mind. EL. That evening, he stared at the invitation under his office lamp for a long time. Something told him this wasn't just a party. It was something bigger. Still, desperate for distraction and unaware of the storm about to be unleashed, he sent in the RSVP, with Sasha as his guest. The venue was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, violins played soft classical melodies, and guests in designer gowns mingled under the golden glow of candlelight. It was the kind of crowd Daniel used to command, back when his reputation was untarnished and his presence sparked admiration instead of suspicion. Dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, he stood with Sasha clinging to his arm, her blood-red gown clashing boldly against the refined elegance of the room. She scanned the crowd hungrily, eyes narrowed at every woman prettier than her. Daniel sipped his champagne, trying to appear composed, but unease gnawed at him. There was a strange buzz in the air, as if something, or someone, was coming. Then, everything shifted. From the back of the hall, the crowd began to stir. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the musicians faltered slightly as the room collectively inhaled. Walking through the grand entrance was a woman in a floor-length ivory dress that shimmered like moonlight. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her posture regal, and her face, calm, confident, glowing with the unmistakable aura of someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. Emily. Heavily pregnant and more radiant than ever. Daniel's glass slipped slightly in his hand. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Sasha's grip on his arm tightened like a vice. "Is that?" she hissed. Emily didn't look their way. She walked with grace through the sea of stunned onlookers, smiling politely, pausing to greet board members, philanthropists, and media moguls, many of whom had distanced themselves from Daniel after his scandal. Her presence was magnetic, but more than that, it was commanding. She was no longer the soft-spoken housewife people pitied. She was something else entirely. A voice called everyone to attention as the keynote speaker took the stage. Emily stepped behind the podium. Applause erupted. Daniel stood frozen. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "My name is Emily Langford, and I'm the founder of the EL Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting women who have experienced betrayal, abandonment, and emotional trauma during the most vulnerable seasons of their lives, pregnancy and motherhood." A murmur rippled through the audience. Now the initials made sense. EL. I disappeared because I had to protect my child, to rebuild myself, to help women like me find strength when they feel most alone. Daniel's jaw clenched. Sasha's expression turned from annoyance to rage. Emily smiled softly, locking eyes with him for just a second. It wasn't a look of revenge, it was power. She no longer needed him. She was no longer broken. She was whole, successful, and untouchable. And in that moment, Daniel realized. She hadn't just returned. She had risen. And she was no longer his wife, she was his reckoning. The applause from Emily's speech had barely faded when the lights dimmed and a large screen flickered to life behind her. A hush swept over the crowd. Emily didn't step down from the podium. She stood firm, her eyes steady and voice unwavering. "There's one more reason I brought you all here tonight," she said, glancing toward Daniel and Sasha. "It's time the truth comes out, not just for me, but for every woman who has been deceived, discarded, and silenced." The first image on the screen was a digital signature, Daniel's, apparently authorizing a large transfer of funds from one of his offshore accounts. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Then came bank statements, forged documents, and wire records. Emily narrated each slide with calm precision. This document was submitted to the board as part of an internal reallocation strategy. Except, this signature was forged. She paused. By someone who had access to Daniel's personal files and passwords, someone who claimed to love him while slowly draining everything he'd built. The camera panned toward Sasha. Her face turned ashen. More evidence followed, voice recordings of Sasha instructing a junior employee to alter reports, screenshots of deleted emails, and hidden camera footage showing her slipping into Daniel's office after hours, alone. "And these," Emily said, pulling out a folder, "are sworn affidavits from former employees, now whistleblowers, confirming manipulation, threats, and blackmail. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated takeover." Gasps turned into whispers. Phones started recording. Sasha's eyes darted toward the exit, her breathing shallow. Suddenly, two plainclothes officers stepped forward from the crowd, flashing badges. Panic surged across Sasha's face. "This is a setup," she cried, stepping back. "She's lying, this is all fake." But no one believed her. The evidence was too precise, too damning. And worst of all, Daniel didn't say a word. He stood still, pale and stunned, as the woman he had once defended was led away by the authorities. Humiliation burned through him as the elite crowd stared, not with admiration, but with disgust. Emily stepped off the stage, her head held high. And Daniel realized he had not only lost everything, he had watched it happen and done nothing to stop it. The fallout came fast and merciless. Within days of the gala, news outlets were flooded with headlines. Sasha Bennett arrested in corporate embezzlement scandal, Millionaire CEO implicated in massive fraud cover-up, Langford Industries under federal investigation. Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing, investors demanding explanations, board members screaming for action, and lawyers urging him to prepare for the worst. The company, once his pride and identity, was in shambles. The board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously. Daniel was to step down as CEO, effective immediately. His name was removed from office doors and press releases. Shareholders distanced themselves publicly. Deals fell through overnight. The empire he'd built, his life's work, was now a cautionary tale in every financial magazine. Alone in the now empty mansion, Daniel sat in silence. No Sasha. No colleagues. No Emily. Just echoes and shadows. He stared at old photos, remembering a time when Emily's laughter filled the halls, when her hands smoothed his tie before meetings, when her love gave his life meaning. Driven by guilt and desperation, he sent her a message. Not to beg, but to explain. To apologize. To see her, just once more. To his surprise, she agreed to meet him in a public cafe, neutral ground. Emily arrived calm and poised, her baby bump more prominent now, her eyes steady. She didn't smile, but she didn't look angry either. Just resolute. Daniel tried to speak, but Emily lifted a hand gently. I didn't come here for apologies, she said. I came to give you clarity. He looked down, ashamed. I lost everything, he whispered. No, she replied. You gave everything away. Piece by piece. He tried to ask about the baby, about her future, about whether he could be part of it. Emily took a deep breath and met his eyes. My child will grow up surrounded by love. But not confusion. Not betrayal. Not from a man who shattered our family and defended the one who destroyed it. There was a long pause. I don't need you, Daniel. Not anymore. With those words, she stood up, nodded politely, and walked away, leaving him behind, for good this time. And for the first time, Daniel felt the true weight of his choices, not in headlines or lawsuits, but in the silence that followed her exit. Daniel sat alone in the quiet of a modest apartment, far removed from the luxury he once took for granted. Gone were the ocean views, the marble floors, the personal chefs. What remained was a worn leather chair, stacks of unopened mail, and the weight of regret pressing heavily on his chest. Every evening felt like a replay of what he had lost. Emily's smile, the soft flutter of their baby he never felt, the warmth of a home built on love. His company was no longer his. His name, once spoken with admiration, now lingered in conversations only as a warning. And Sasha, once the source of thrill and chaos, had vanished into obscurity, her name buried under court documents and felony charges. She was convicted of fraud and quietly taken away, her fame reduced to a single scandalous headline. Daniel started therapy, reluctantly at first, then more willingly as the days dragged on. He began unpacking years of buried insecurity, ego, and entitlement. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the pain he caused, the trust he broke, and the family he shattered. Healing, his therapist warned, wouldn't bring back what he lost, but it could help him understand why he let it slip through his fingers. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. Her foundation grew rapidly, supported by a community of strong women and loyal friends. She attended parenting classes, set up a nursery with soft earth tones, and surrounded herself with kindness. She laughed again, genuinely, freely. She didn't hate Daniel. She pitied him. But she no longer needed to fix him. As her due date approached, she stood before a mirror, her hands resting on her belly, whispering promises to her child. Love. Safety. Truth. And in another part of the city, Daniel wept, for the man he had been, and the man he hoped he might still become. The sun bathed the park in a soft, golden light as children laughed and ran through the freshly planted garden paths. Balloons danced in the breeze, and the sound of live music floated gently across the open air. At the heart of it all stood a new bronze plaque gleaming under the morning sky. Hope Grove, dedicated to resilience, founded by the EL Foundation. Emily stood just beside it, holding her 1-year-old daughter in her arms. The baby had Emily's dark eyes and the same curious sparkle she once carried through her early marriage. Dressed in a pale blue sundress and tiny white sandals, the child cooed happily, reaching for the fluttering ribbon that marked the park's grand opening. Emily looked radiant, glowing not from pregnancy anymore, but from purpose, healing, and freedom. Her long journey had been painful, raw, and deeply personal, but here she was, surrounded by community members, families, and press, all gathered to honor the space she had dreamed of during her loneliest nights. The park was more than just a project. It was her declaration of strength, a living monument to every woman who had been left behind and still chose to rise. As the ribbon was cut, applause erupted. A reporter stepped forward, notebook in hand. "Miss Langford," she called gently, "if I may, would you ever consider reconciling with your ex-husband?" Emily paused, the corners of her lips lifting just slightly. She looked at her daughter, then at the sun-drenched crowd, her voice calm and certain. "Sometimes a broken heart," she said, "is just the start of something better." Across the lawn, unseen by most, stood Daniel, dressed modestly, no cameras following him this time. His eyes were glassy, and his hands trembled slightly as he watched Emily cradle the child he'd never gotten to hold. He didn't move closer, didn't call her name. He knew better now. This wasn't his moment. It never would be again. He watched not with bitterness, but with the quiet ache of understanding, the kind of pain that lingers when you finally see the value of what you destroyed. There were no illusions left, no fantasies. Just clarity. Emily turned away from the podium, her daughter resting her head against her shoulder. With her team behind her and her future ahead, she walked slowly through the park, sunlight catching in her hair, laughter echoing around her. She didn't look back. And in that moment, she wasn't just a woman who had been betrayed. She was a mother, a leader, a survivor, and above all else, she was finally free.